Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This will be the sixth in our series of sessions on upgrading from Primo to Primo V. In today's session, we will discuss the conversion of Primo data configuration to Primo V, in addition to other related functionality in Primo V. This will be part 2. Part 1 was delivered last week and is already available in our GoVE documentation under the section titled Getting Started with GoVE. For those of you who will not be participating live, I strongly recommend viewing the recording of part 1 before moving on to this second part. This session will begin with a short reminder of the subtopics discussed in part 1, mainly display field adjustment, local field configuration, and Primo V normalization guidelines. Once we're all aligned with the basics of field normalization, we'll go on to discuss the use of data normalization for the benefit of search and facet functionality in Primo V, including advanced search indexes and local facets. I will then focus on the implementation of local resource types that can be configured as an addition to the default list and mapping of Primo V resource types. We'll go over the process of recreating lateral links in Classic Primo as hypertext links in Primo VE's full record display. I'm going to throw in another topic which was part of data normalization in Primo Backoffice and is configured separately when it comes to Primo V. I'm talking about deduplication and FRBRization, understanding the merging and grouping process and the related settings. You're welcome to submit questions related to this session in the Q&A box, and I will try to address them towards the end of the session. Finally, we will look at several questions that have been pre-submitted. Okay, so let's get started with the summary of the previous session on local normalization of data. Primo V comes with out-of-the-box sets of normalization rules which affect display, search, and facets. In addition to the fields available out of the box, you can create local fields. Unlike Primo Backoffice, where local fields had to be created separately for display, search, and facet, in Primo VE, a single local field can be used for either, any, or all of these uses. There are two methods to populate local fields, which I've highlighted in the lower screenshot on this slide. One is mapping all subfields of local bibliographic fields, such as the 500s and the 900s for Mark 21, and the 300s and 900s for Unimark. This method does not involve normalization rules, but is limited to a predefined drop-down list of Mark fields. The other method would be to compose custom normalization rules to map any bibliographic field from the source records to Primo VE local field. For display purposes, you won't always need to create a new local field. You have the option to review and modify the normalization of out-of-the-box display fields. None of these options require re-indexing of your data. Now, as I mentioned, a single local field can be used for display, search, and facet. There are two relevant checkboxes for this on the Manage Display and Local Fields page. Select the Enable Field for Search checkbox if you want the information in this local field to be searchable in Primo V in addition to being displayed. Select the Enable Field for Facet checkbox if you want the information in this local field to be used as a facet to filter search results. It's important to understand that these two checkboxes are effective only for Mark fields selected from the drop-down list we just talked about. If you want to grant search and facet capabilities to a local field which will be populated from a field that is not in this drop-down list, you'll have to configure an additional set of normalization rules. These rules can, of course, be copied from the display normalization rules of the local field and then slightly adjusted, as you'll see in a moment. In order to use search and facet normalization for a local field, you must first indicate which local fields will be used for this purpose. The page titled Local Fields Using Search and Facet Normalization Rules is where you define which local fields will allow normalization for search and facet purposes. Okay, so I'm going to go to Discovery Configuration menu, Other, Local Fields Using Search and Facet Normalization Rule, and we're going to define a local field that we will be using for search and facet normalization. I'll randomly select the local field. over to Manage Display and Local Fields, Add Field, Add Local Field. I'm going to find that local field 90 that I just indicated. And now you see we have a normalization rule for search and facet. You can create a maximum of 10 local fields that support search and facet normalization. So to summarize, you have 100 available local fields. Up to 10 of them can hold search and facet normalization rules. If you have found that 10 local fields of this type are not enough for your needs, please contact us using the GoVE info inbox, and we will look for a solution. Another point to be aware of is that creation of search and facet normalization rules or changes to existing rules require re-indexing of the relevant data. You can create a set of titles and submit a request to Primo support to have them re-indexed. Sets of titles can be based on logical queries using Alma's advanced search, or an itemized list of records which would be uploaded to Alma or a list created in Alma. If it is not possible to create a set of the relevant records in Alma, or if the normalization rules apply to most or all records, a full re-index will have to be executed by Primo support. You are entitled to one full re-index during your GoVE process, in addition to the scheduled semi-annual full re-indexing of your Primo VE index, usually taking place during July or August, and again in January. So the first step is to define a local field as one that will offer search and facet normalization, which we've just seen in Alma. Once a field has been added to the local fields using search and facet normalization rules page, go over to the Manage Display and Local Fields and add the local field you just defined. In the normalization rule section, under normalization rule for display, there will appear another option, normalization rule for search and facet. We've seen that as well. You can set the search and facet normalization the same or differently than the display normalization. Once done, save and then hit the Apply Rules button. At this point, all that's left is the re-indexing. I recommend completing work on all local fields that will require full re-indexing before submitting the re-indexing request. Prior to applying new or modified normalization rules to the view, you can test the local field search and facet normalization rules and see how the rule set will affect the index data of a specific Alma record. Simply hit the Actions button and then hit Test. And you'll be able to select an MMS ID and see how the local search field is populated. Once you have configured a local field for search, you can go to the Advanced Search Configuration tab in View Configuration and add the field as a search index. If you have enabled pre-filters by ticking the Enable for Basic Search checkbox, the local index will be available also in the Index Pre-filter dropdown in the Primo VE Views Basic Search. You can then, of course, go on to placing the new search index in the desired position in the dropdown and define which search slots will offer this local search index. And you can go back to the recording of the first GoVE session where we discussed this. The use of a local field as a new search index is available once you've enabled the Enable Field for Search checkbox. It doesn't matter whether you've used the simple method of selecting a mark field from the drop-down list, or if you've populated the local field using search and facet normalization rules. For local fields that have the Enable Field for Facet checkbox enabled, you can go to the Brief Results tab in View Configuration and add the field as a local facet. You can then go on to place the new local facet in the desired position in the Facet section at the right or left of the results list in Primo VE's view, and define which search slots will offer this local facet. This too was discussed during the first GoVE session. The use of a local field as a facet is available once you've enabled the enable field for search checkbox. It doesn't matter whether you've used the simple method of selecting a mark field from the drop-down list, or if you've populated the local field using search and facet normalization rules. As you see, facet normalization rules without the facet checkbox enabled will not be enough to add the local field as a new local facet. Let's move on to another area in PrimoVE data normalization, resource types. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, the mapping of resource types in Primo backoffice can be viewed in the normalization rule set of the display section. The PNX display type field and is also configured in the normalization of additional PNX fields: search resource type, facet prefilter, facets resource type, add data format, add data genre, and add data RIS type. In PrimoVE, each resource type affects the display, search, and facet. Resource types come with hard-coded mapping. This mapping can be seen by simply Googling PrimoVE mapping. Clause 3 of the mapping document describes the mapping for Mark 21, Unimark, Dublin Core, CN Mark, and Core Mark cataloging formats. Be sure to work with the section relevant for your data. The mapping of these resource types cannot be modified or disabled. To overcome this constraint, you can configure local resource types. Their mapping will take precedence over default resource type mapping. In addition to overriding default mapping, local resource types allow you to add new types that are not included out of the box. The resource type configuration process has been simplified in PrimoVE as opposed to Primo backoffice. Local resource types are used the same way in both Primo and PrimoVE, but here are their configuration differences. As I mentioned earlier, a resource type was configured in the display section normalization and then copied or reconfigured in additional sections: search, facet, RIS, format, and genre. In PrimoVE, you'll be configuring resource type only once. The plural form of the resource type in Primo backoffice was configured in a separate code table, which then had to be deployed. In PrimoVE, this label is defined on this single configuration page, which you see here on the right. A non-harvesting update pipe was required after each modification of the normalization rules, whereas in PrimoVE, you only need to run the recalculation job on the relevant set of records, not on all your data. In order to determine which resource types you'll want to evaluate whether to recreate in PrimoVE or not, open the display type normalization rules used by the pipe set to harvest your ALMA data in Primo backoffice. Compare the list of types to the list of default types in the mapping document I mentioned earlier. If you do not have access to Primo backoffice, you can perform a few comparison searches in Primo and PrimoVE and examine the resource type facet values returned in each system. You are always welcome to contact Primo support upon any uncertainty. To configure a local resource type in PrimoVE, go to the Local Resource Types under Display Configuration in the Discovery Configuration menu. We're in the Configuration menu, Discovery, Display Configuration, Local Resource Types. You can configure up to 20 local resource types with up to 4 mapping conditions each. Define a code, singular and plural display labels, and their translated labels if relevant. See the globe icons. If you define a code that is used also in CDI, the labels for your local resource type will override the CDI values. This allows you to align resource types between local and central index records. Now, out of the box codes for PrimoVE resource types should not be used for local resource types. For our mark mapping condition, simply specify the mark and the mark field and subfield in the source record that contains the resource type that you want to map to this local resource type. Alternatively, you can use regex to specify the mark field in the source record that contains the resource type that you want to map to this local resource type. Then specify the specific value or values of the resource type that you want to map to this local resource type, or use regex to specify the regular expression used to extract the resource type from the source field. For control fields such as LDR or 008, you'll most likely need to use regex to declare the position that the condition will relate to. In this slide, you can see an example of a condition which involves regex. Records with M in position 21 of control field 008 will receive a resource type of monograph. Once done, run the recalculate local resource types job on the set of relevant ALMA records. New records later created or added in ALMA will automatically be processed by your local resource type conditions. The next topic I'd like to discuss is hypertext linking configuration. In Primo backoffice, 10 local search fields, LSR 30 through LSR 39, were reserved for lateral links. These are the clickable values in the record's full display detail section, which generate an advanced search based on the detail itself, often as it is displayed. Primo VE allows you to define which display fields will come with hypertext linking in the detail section of the record's full display. To use this functionality, the search field must be configured as a search index for advanced search. This feature is not used by all Primo institutions. To see whether you'll want to recreate hypertext linking in Primo V, go to the search section normalization rules in Primo backoffice to see if any of the LSR 30 through 39 are in use. Alternatively, simply open a few random records in Classic Primo frontend and check whether the detail section is offering any hyperlinks. Note that in Primo VE, some fields offer hypertext linking by default, such as creator. This can be seen by inspecting a display normalization rule set in Manage Display and Local Fields. If the display field contains the $$Q subfield in Primo VE's normalized record, clicking on the hypertext link will perform an advanced search using the contents of $$Q subfield instead of the display text. To create additional hypertext links, go to the hypertext linking definition page under Display Configuration in the Discovery Configuration menu and add a row with the desired settings. We're in the configuration menu, Discovery, Display Configuration, Hypertext Linking Definition. Here I've already configured a few rows. Let's add a new one. Let's add one for creator. And where we want the advanced search to search all creator fields in the Primo VE index that have an exact match of the content of the $$Q in the Primo VE record PNX. And we want it to search all search scopes, not only local. So this is local and central index and other indexes such as EBSCO. Add row and save. There's one more topic I'd like to go over today. As I've mentioned in the past, Dedup and FRBR key field values are no longer part of the PNX record. So there's no need to write normalization rules to create the keys. The Dedup and FRBR keys and matching calculations are described in the product documentation. These keys are currently not configurable, However, there is a plan to add the ability to locally configure dedup and FRBR keys. In addition to the description of keys and calculations in the documentation, Alma offers a test utility page where you can find out whether a specific record would match any other records to become deduped or FRBRized. We're in the configuration menu, discovery, other, dedup and FRBR test utility. The page also offers the option to compare a couple of records and understand why they do or do not match to become deduped or FRBRized. Compare records. It's important to understand that record matching is done in the PrimoVE database, but the merging itself occurs only in the PrimoVE view each time a search is performed. There are two methods to prevent records from being deduped or FRBRized in PrimoVE search result list. The first, suppression rules. You can create suppression rules based on one or two conditions each, involving holding level inventory details or bibliographic level metadata. You also have the option to configure conditions involving values populating local fields, pretty similar to search scope conditions. Now, in order to use a local field for this purpose, the local fields enabled field for search checkbox must be enabled. It's worth mentioning that if you define two conditions, both must be met. If you want to use an OR operator between conditions as opposed to an AND operator, simply create another suppression rule. This method affects future records that will be created or added in Alma, and records that are re-indexed due to cataloging modification or re-indexing processes. For suppression rules to take effect for existing records that have not been modified or re-indexed since the configuration of or modification of the rule, use the second method, which is this would be running the prevent FRBR dedup job on a set of itemized or logical titles. Dedup or FRBR functionality can be suppressed altogether by disabling them in the Brief Results tab in View Configuration. Okay, display configuration, configure views, edit, Brief Results. Scrolling down to the bottom of the page, you have settings. We can disable FRBR, disable dedup, and you can control the displayed field, the displayed record of the two of dedup and FRBR. You can choose for FRBR, you can choose preferred or generic, and for dedup you can choose whether physical, electronic, or digital will be displayed in the search results. In order to see which suppression rules you are actually using in Primo Backoffice, go to the dedup or FRBR sections in the normalization set used by the pipe processing your Alma data source. Rules that set a value of 99 in the T field of the dedup or FRBR sections in the PNX are, as a matter of fact, suppression rules. A record with dedup T equals 99 will not merge with other records, and a record with FRBR T equals 99 will not FRBRize with other records. If you do not have access to Primo Backoffice, feel free to contact Primo Support and request a summary of the suppression rules you currently have in Primo Backoffice. I'm going to pause here in order to address questions that have come in through the Q&A box.
We had one question that came in when you were talking about local resource types, and they were wondering if you could demonstrate it.
Sure. Discovery, display configuration, local resource types. Now, let's see an existing one. where you'd select a code, the singular label, plural label, which will appear in the facet values, translation, if relevant for your if you use multilingual, and then this is a good example. This is an example that it's going to use using regex to determine whether a record will be marked as monoseries. Okay, so this is the syntax. If position 21 of control field 008 equals M, then the record will become monoseries resource type. And you can add another condition, and if I remember correctly, mark field. Okay, so here you define the mark field and the subfield, and here if, for example, if 999A equals this string, then the record will become we'll have a resource type of. It's not correct. Okay, I think we have to. Yeah, that was it. Okay, so in order for a record to become monoseries resource type, it has to meet both conditions. 00821 has to be M, and 999 subfield A has to have this string. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Why isn't for the journal search its result subjects are not hyperlinked like the normal slot? How would you configure subject heading links in the journal slot or databases?
I don't think it's possible to configure hypertext links for journal or database searches. But I'm happy to receive the question either in the GoVE inbox or as a case, and we'll verify. I'll fully check before responding with a definite answer, but I'm pretty sure it's not possible to configure hypertext linking in results that you'll see in journal search and database search.
Okay, we did get another question. This one came through chat, and it's one of the collections in Alma D, such as exam papers, has 1,000 papers with different years, such as 2016, 2017, 2018. If we would like to suppress records in a group for a particular unit code, it's not grouping right now. The current threshold is 875, and we are unable to reach that threshold. We have to add another metadata. What metadata can we add to reach the threshold?
We'd have to see this example. We'd have to see this example and analyze it specifically. Please submit a case to Primo support with this example.
Okay. No other questions right now, Ben.
Great. Okay, so here are some questions that we have been presented with in the past. Is it possible to change a local field label in the facets to something other than that field's display label? For example, by using the facets label code table. The answer is that details section and facet title uses the same label code for the full display labels code table. The solution would be to create an empty local field and use its label by adding it to the existing local field. And I've thrown in a screenshot demonstrating this, adding in an empty local field just to use its label. Here's another one. I'm trying to edit the norm rules for display type, but I don't see it as an option in the drop-down menu in the Manage Display and Local Field section. So as I explained before, resource types are no longer controlled by the display normalization. The mapping of out-of-the-box resource type is hard-coded, and local resource types can be configured in addition or in a way that would replace an out-of-the-box resource type. One more question. We have a resource type for physical books based on validate FMT routine, and another resource type for electronic books. Primo VE offers only one resource type for books. How would we split the out-of-the-box type into two resource types? Now, this may sound a bit complicated, but I think that the suggested solution will give you good understanding of the logic behind overriding out-of-the-box mapping with your local mapping. What you'll want to do is relabel the out-of-the-box resource type as ebooks for electronic, and create a local resource type labeled books, mapped according to FMT conditions. I've thrown in here the validate FMT, the relevant validate FMT for books. Records that meet the FMT condition will get the code of the new physical book resource type, whereas books that don't meet the FMT validation condition will still meet the conditions of the out-of-the-box resource type, which you've labeled as electronic books. Of course, this is just an example. You'd have to see how your book and ebook resource types are mapped in Primo Backoffice. Thank you for tuning in for the sixth session of our GoVE Become an Expert series. I hope you all benefit from the topics we discussed today, and I hope to see you again in future GoVE sessions.
Perfect, Ben. Thank you very much for taking the time today to present this valuable information, and thank you everybody for attending the session. Like I said, I'm going to make the slides and the recording available to you. And have a fantastic day. We don't have any other questions, Ben, so you're done. So thanks a lot, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in for the sixth session of our GoVE Become an Expert series. I hope you all benefit from the topics we discussed today, and I hope to see you again in future GoVE sessions.